Before we share this profoundly moving story about resilience, the unbreakable bonds of family that transcend traditional structures, and the extraordinary courage of children who face circumstances far beyond their years, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. What you are about to witness represents one of the most emotionally powerful moments in television history. A reminder that family is defined not by conventional arrangements, but by the love, commitment, and sacrifice that people demonstrate toward one another during the most challenging circumstances. Throughout the landscape of human experience, certain moments illuminate fundamental truths about courage, responsibility, and the remarkable capacity of young people to demonstrate maturity far beyond their chronological age when circumstances demand it. The story of what occurred during a Family Feud taping in March 2025 demonstrates how public platforms can become spaces for honoring unconventional family structures, how children in caregiving roles deserve recognition and support, and how one young person's determination to represent his family despite extraordinary obstacles would create a moment of such profound emotional impact that it would temporarily suspend the normal operations of a television production and remind millions of viewers about the true meaning of family devotion. What 12-year-old Christopher Bennett revealed to Steve Harvey and the assembled audience would transform a routine game show episode into a testament of love, sacrifice, and the remarkable strength that children can demonstrate when they become caregivers for the adults who should be caring for them. Christopher Bennett was 12 years old when he appeared on Family Feud, representing what producers initially believed would be a multi-generational family from Detroit, Michigan. The application submitted months earlier had listed Christopher along with his grandmother, his aunt, and 2 cousins as the family team. However, when the taping day arrived, Christopher appeared at the studio, accompanied only by a family friend who served as his guardian for travel purposes. The production staff, understandably concerned and confused by the absence of the other family members, met with Christopher and his guardian to understand the situation before proceeding with any filming. What they learned during that conversation revealed a story of such complexity and emotional weight that it required careful consideration about how to proceed appropriately. Christopher lived with his grandmother Dorothy, who was 68 years old and battling advanced stage lung cancer that had metastasized to other organs. Dorothy had been Christopher's primary caregiver since he was 3 years old, after his mother, Dorothy's daughter, had died from complications related to substance abuse disorder. Christopher's father had never been actively involved in his life, and Dorothy had stepped forward to provide the stable home environment that Christopher desperately needed. For 9 years, Dorothy and Christopher had built a life together, characterized by mutual devotion and the kind of close bond that often develops between grandparents and grandchildren who live together. Dorothy had worked as a home health aide until her cancer diagnosis forced her retirement, and she had managed their household on limited fixed income while ensuring that Christopher attended school regularly, participated in age-appropriate activities, and received the love and structure that children require for healthy development. Dorothy's cancer diagnosis had arrived approximately 18 months before the Family Feud taping. The prognosis had been poor from the beginning, with doctors indicating that aggressive treatment might extend her life but would not cure the disease. Dorothy had opted for treatment that balanced life extension with quality of life, wanting to remain as functional as possible for as long as possible so that she could continue caring for Christopher. However, the progression of her disease had been more rapid than anticipated, and by the time the Family Feud taping date arrived, Dorothy was largely bedridden and receiving hospice care at home. She was physically incapable of traveling to Los Angeles for the taping, and the reality was becoming increasingly clear that Christopher would soon face the devastating loss of the person who had been his entire family and his only source of stability. The Family Feud application had been submitted during a period when Dorothy's health had been relatively stable and she had envisioned the show appearance as an opportunity to create positive memories with Christopher and their extended family members. Dorothy had specifically wanted Christopher to have the experience of appearing on national television, believing it would be something special he could remember and be proud of throughout his life. She had viewed it as a gift she could give him, a joyful experience that would stand in contrast to the difficult medical realities that dominated their daily existence. However, as her health deteriorated and the taping date approached, it became clear that her participation would be impossible. Dorothy had insisted that Christopher should still attend, arguing that he deserved the opportunity and that she could experience it vicariously through him even if she could not be physically present. The other family members who had been listed on the original application were Dorothy's sister and her children, but family circumstances had changed in ways that made their participation impossible. Dorothy's sister had recently relocated to another state for employment reasons, and the cousins who had initially agreed to participate were no longer available due to various commitments and complications. Christopher found himself in the position of being the only family member able to attend the taping, creating a situation that technically violated the show's format requirements for family teams. The family friend who accompanied Christopher to Los Angeles was a neighbor who had been helping care for Dorothy, and who had volunteered to serve as Christopher's travel companion and temporary guardian for the trip. When production staff learned about Christopher's situation, they faced a complex decision about how to proceed. The standard Family Feud format required family teams competing against one another, and having a single contestant, particularly a 12-year-old child, did not fit the established structure. However, the staff also recognized that Christopher had traveled across the country specifically to honor his grandmother's wish, and that sending him home without allowing him to participate would be deeply disappointing and would waste the opportunity that Dorothy had wanted to give him. The production team consulted with senior producers and ultimately with Steve Harvey himself about how to handle this unprecedented situation in a way that respected both the show's format and Christopher's circumstances. Steve Harvey, upon learning about Christopher's story, made an immediate decision that the show would find a way to accommodate this young person who was facing circumstances that no child should have to navigate. Steve instructed the production team to create a special segment that would allow Christopher to participate even though he did not have a family team. The plan developed was to have Christopher answer Family Feud questions individually in a format similar to Fast Money, but adapted to his solo participation, and regardless of his performance, to ensure he received prize money that could help support him and his grandmother during this difficult time. Steve made clear that the segment's purpose was not about entertainment value, but about honoring a grandmother's wish to give her grandson a meaningful experience, and about recognizing the courage of a child serving as a caregiver for a dying grandparent. The taping began with Steve Harvey explaining to the studio audience that they were about to witness something different from the usual Family Feud format. He introduced Christopher and provided appropriate context about his grandmother's illness and her desire for Christopher to have this experience. Steve's explanation was carefully worded to provide necessary information while respecting Christopher's privacy and dignity. The audience response was immediate and emotional, with many people visibly moved by the recognition of what this young person was facing. Steve approached Christopher with visible tenderness, kneeling down to speak at eye level with him rather than standing over him in a way that might feel intimidating. Steve asked Christopher to tell the audience about his grandmother and about what she meant to him. Christopher, despite his young age, spoke with remarkable composure about Dorothy's role in his life. He explained that his grandmother had taken him in when his mother died and had given him a home filled with love, even though she had limited financial resources. He described how his grandmother had always made him feel safe and valued, how she had attended every school event and celebrated every achievement no matter how small, and how she had taught him about kindness, responsibility, and the importance of education. Christopher's voice remained steady as he spoke, demonstrating a maturity that came from having faced more loss and responsibility than most adults experience in a lifetime. Steve then asked Christopher the question that would lead to the moment that would break down not just Steve, but also the production crew and audience members. Steve asked Christopher why it was so important to him to appear on Family Feud alone when his grandmother could not be with him. Christopher's response, delivered in the clear, earnest voice of a 12-year-old child trying to explain something profoundly important, would create one of the most emotionally devastating moments ever captured on television. Christopher explained that his grandmother had very little time left and that she was worried about what would happen to him after she died. He said that his grandmother felt guilty that she could not leave him money or material possessions that would make his life easier after her death. She worried constantly about his future and about whether he would be okay without her. Christopher continued, explaining that when the Family Feud opportunity had arisen, his grandmother had seen it as potentially the only substantial gift she could give him. She had hoped that if the family won, the prize money could be set aside for Christopher's future, perhaps helping with his education or providing some financial cushion during what would be a difficult transition period after her death. When it became clear that she could not participate herself, she had made Christopher promise that he would still go and that he would do his best to win money that could help secure his future. Christopher said that appearing on Family Feud was not about having fun or being on television, although those things were nice. It was about keeping his promise to his grandmother and trying to provide her with peace of mind during her final weeks by showing her that he could succeed in this challenge and that perhaps he would be okay after she was gone. Christopher then revealed the most heartbreaking aspect of his situation. He explained that his grandmother was watching the taping from home through a live stream that the production staff had arranged at Christopher's request. He said that his grandmother had told him that morning before he left for the studio that seeing him on Family Feud and knowing he had tried his best to honor her wishes would be one of the last great joys of her life. Christopher said he needed to do well, not for himself, but so that his grandmother could die knowing she had given him something valuable, and so she could stop worrying about his future during whatever time she had remaining. The studio fell into absolute silence as Christopher finished speaking. Steve Harvey, a man known for his quick wit and ability to handle emotional situations with grace, stood completely still with tears streaming down his face. He made no attempt to hide his emotional response or to maintain professional composure. The cameras captured Steve removing his glasses to wipe his eyes, his shoulders shaking as he processed what this young person had just shared. The audience sat in stunned silence, many people openly weeping at the recognition of the burden this child was carrying and the extraordinary love and maturity he was demonstrating. Steve Harvey walked over to Christopher and embraced him, holding him for a long moment while both of them cried. When Steve finally stepped back, he addressed the camera directly, speaking to Christopher's grandmother, who was watching from her bed in Detroit. Steve told Dorothy that she had raised an extraordinary young man who demonstrated more courage and character than most adults ever achieve. He said that her worry about leaving Christopher without material possessions was understandable but misplaced, because the greatest gift she had given him was not money, but rather the values, love, and strength of character that would sustain him throughout his life. Steve said that Christopher's willingness to travel alone to Los Angeles to honor her wish and to try to ease her worries about his future was testament to the quality of her parenting and the depth of their bond. Steve then made an announcement that would represent one of the most generous gestures in game show history. He told Christopher and the watching Dorothy that regardless of how Christopher performed on the questions, he was personally ensuring that Christopher would receive $50,000. Steve explained that this money was not charity, but rather recognition of Christopher's courage and an investment in the future of a young person who had already demonstrated remarkable character. Steve said that he wanted Dorothy to spend her remaining time knowing that Christopher would have financial resources to help with his transition to whatever living arrangement would come next and to support his education and development. However, Steve was not finished. He announced that the family Feud production company was matching his $50,000 contribution, bringing the total to $100,000. Steve then turned to the studio audience and explained Christopher's situation more fully, asking whether anyone present wanted to contribute to supporting this young person's future. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Audience members began coming forward to make commitments, some offering hundreds of dollars, while others pledged thousands. Production staff members contributed. Other contestants present at the studio that day offered donations. Within 30 minutes, the impromptu fundraising effort had generated an additional $75,000 in commitments, bringing the total support for Christopher to $175,000. Steve made arrangements for all contributions to be placed in a trust account specifically for Christopher's benefit, managed by trustees who would ensure the money was used appropriately for his education, housing, and necessary expenses. The legal and financial arrangements were handled by the production company's attorneys, working pro bono to ensure Christopher's interests were protected. Steve also announced that his foundation would be connecting Christopher with counseling services and support resources to help him navigate the grief and transition he would face when his grandmother passed away, and to assist with whatever placement arrangements would be necessary. The segment that was supposed to involve Christopher answering Family Feud questions became almost secondary to the outpouring of support and recognition that his story had generated. Steve did walk Christopher through a series of questions, treating them as a respectful activity rather than as high-stakes competition. Christopher answered thoughtfully, demonstrating that he was intelligent and capable despite the enormous stress he was managing. Steve praised each answer regardless of whether it appeared on the board, reinforcing Christopher's competence and worth, rather than focusing on game show scoring. Throughout the extended segment, Steve maintained physical connection with Christopher, keeping a hand on his shoulder or kneeling beside him, providing the kind of supportive adult presence that Christopher desperately needed but would soon lose when his grandmother died. Steve spoke to Christopher about his future, emphasizing that many people were now invested in his success and that he would not face the coming challenges alone. Steve shared his own experiences with loss and difficulty during his youth, creating connection through vulnerability and demonstrating that it was possible to overcome profound hardship and build a successful life. The episode that eventually aired included extensive footage of Christopher's testimony and the outpouring of support, edited carefully to respect his privacy while honoring the significance of what had occurred. The production team consulted with child welfare experts and trauma specialists about how to present the story in ways that would not exploit Christopher's vulnerability or sensationalize his circumstances. The final edited version balanced the emotional power of the moment with appropriate restraint and dignity, focusing on Christopher's strength and the community response rather than on tragic details of his situation. The response when the episode aired was unprecedented in scale and scope. Millions of viewers were moved by Christopher's story, and the show was inundated with offers of additional support. Viewers across the country sent donations to the trust fund established for Christopher's benefit. Families offered to provide foster care if needed once Dorothy passed away. Educational institutions offered scholarships for Christopher's future college education. Mental health professionals volunteered counseling services. The outpouring demonstrated the profound human capacity for compassion and collective care when confronted with a child facing circumstances that offended fundamental sensibilities about how children should be protected and supported. Child welfare advocates used Christopher's story to highlight the broader issue of children serving as caregivers for sick or dying family members, a phenomenon that affected hundreds of thousands of young people across the country but received limited public attention or policy support. Organizations working with kinship care families where grandparents raised grandchildren due to parental absence noted that Christopher's situation was, unfortunately, not unique, and that many children faced similar challenges with far less support and recognition. The visibility of Christopher's story created increased public awareness about these issues and motivated advocacy for better support systems for children in caregiving roles. Dorothy Bennett watched the Family Feud episode from her hospice bed in Detroit, surrounded by home health aides and the neighbor who had accompanied Christopher to Los Angeles. According to those present, Dorothy cried throughout the broadcast, but particularly during the moments when Steve Harvey spoke directly to her through the camera. She expressed profound gratitude that Christopher would have financial support and that so many people had demonstrated care for her grandson. Dorothy told those around her that she could now face her death with peace, knowing that Christopher would not be alone and would have resources to support his transition to whatever came next. She said that the Family Feud experience had given her the greatest gift possible during her final days, which was the knowledge that her grandson would be remembered and supported by people who recognized his character and potential. Dorothy Bennett passed away 6 weeks after the Family Feud episode aired. Christopher was present at her bedside, along with hospice workers and the neighbor who had become a consistent supportive presence. In the weeks leading up to her death, Dorothy had worked with social workers and attorneys to finalize arrangements for Christopher's care. A distant cousin who had been located and vetted agreed to become Christopher's legal guardian, providing him with family placement rather than entry into the foster care system. The trust fund established from the Family Feud donations would support his needs and education while living with his new guardian family. Steve Harvey attended Dorothy's funeral, traveling to Detroit to pay respects to a woman he had never met, but whose final act of love for her grandson had profoundly affected him. Steve delivered a brief eulogy describing Dorothy as having succeeded in the most important measure of parenting, which was raising a child who embodied values of courage, responsibility, and love, even in the face of devastating loss. Steve committed to maintaining connection with Christopher as he navigated adolescence and eventually adulthood, offering to serve as a mentor and support person. Steve established a scholarship in Dorothy's name that would support other children being raised by grandparents, ensuring that her legacy would extend beyond Christopher to benefit other young people in similar circumstances. Christopher's adjustment to life with his guardian family was understandably difficult, complicated by grief, displacement, and the profound loss of the person who had been his entire world. However, the financial security provided by the trust fund allowed his guardian family to access therapeutic support, educational resources, and stability that would not have been possible otherwise. Christopher participated in grief counseling specifically designed for children who had lost caregiving grandparents, and he connected with peer support groups where he met other young people navigating similar losses. The process of healing was gradual and non-linear, but Christopher demonstrated the same resilience and strength that he had shown on the Family Feud stage. 3 years after his Family Feud appearance, Christopher was thriving in high school, maintaining strong academic performance and participating in community service activities that honored his grandmother's memory. He volunteered with organizations supporting elderly people and children in kinship care arrangements, using his experience to provide peer support and to advocate for better policies and resources. He maintained regular contact with Steve Harvey, who had indeed followed through on his commitment to serve as a mentor. Steve attended Christopher's significant life events, including his 8th grade graduation and later his high school milestones, providing consistent adult presence and support. The trust fund established from Family Feud donations was carefully managed to support Christopher's needs while preserving resources for his college education and eventual independence. The financial security allowed his guardian family to focus on his emotional and developmental needs rather than struggling with basic economic survival. Education professionals noted that Christopher's academic success, despite his traumatic experiences, was likely supported significantly by the stability that financial resources provided, illustrating the connection between economic security and educational outcomes for children facing adversity. 5 years after the original taping, Christopher appeared again on Family Feud in a special episode featuring previous contestants whose appearances had created memorable moments. Christopher, now 17 years old and preparing for college, returned to the stage where his life had changed so dramatically. The reunion with Steve Harvey was emotional for both of them, representing the fulfillment of Steve's commitment to remain present in Christopher's life and Christopher's survival and growth despite devastating loss. Christopher spoke about his grandmother's legacy and about how the support he received following his Family Feud appearance had literally changed the trajectory of his life. During this reunion episode, Christopher announced that he planned to pursue a degree in social work with a focus on supporting children in kinship care arrangements and children serving as caregivers for sick family members. He said that his own experience had shown him both the challenges these children faced and the critical importance of adequate support systems. He wanted to dedicate his professional life to ensuring that other young people in similar circumstances received the recognition, resources, and assistance that he had been fortunate enough to receive. His grandmother's wish that he have opportunities and support had evolved into his own commitment to creating those opportunities for others. Steve Harvey spoke during the reunion episode about how Christopher's original appearance had changed his own perspective and priorities. Steve described how witnessing Christopher's courage and the circumstances he was navigating had motivated Steve to expand his foundation's work to specifically support children in kinship care arrangements. Steve's foundation had since provided millions of dollars in scholarships, counseling services, and emergency financial assistance to grandparents raising grandchildren and to young people who had lost caregiving grandparents. Christopher's story had become the inspiration for this expanded mission, demonstrating how one young person's courage could catalyze systemic change that would benefit thousands of others. The long-term cultural impact of Christopher's Family Feud appearance extended beyond individual support to influence public policy discussions about kinship care, children as caregivers, and the need for better support systems for non-traditional family structures. Child welfare advocates cited Christopher's story in testimony before legislative bodies considering expanded funding for kinship care programs. Educational institutions developed specialized support programs for students who were managing caregiving responsibilities alongside their academic work. Healthcare systems began implementing screening protocols to identify young caregivers and connect them with appropriate resources. The story also influenced broader cultural conversations about how family is defined and who deserves recognition and support. Christopher's devotion to his grandmother and his willingness to honor her final wishes challenged stereotypical narratives about youth as self-centered or irresponsible. His story provided counterweight to negative portrayals of children raised in non-traditional family structures, demonstrating that love, stability, and strong values could be transmitted effectively in many different family configurations. Child development experts noted that Christopher's resilience and character were testament to his grandmother's successful parenting despite limited economic resources and despite facing terminal illness. 10 years after standing alone on the Family Feud stage as a 12-year-old boy trying to honor his dying grandmother's wish, Christopher was completing his master's degree in social work and working as an advocate for kinship care families. He had established a nonprofit organization named in his grandmother's honor that provided emergency financial assistance, counseling services, and educational support to children being raised by grandparents and to young people who had lost caregiving grandparents. The organization had helped hundreds of families navigate challenges similar to those Christopher had faced, and it had become a model for other communities developing support systems for kinship care arrangements. Christopher maintained his relationship with Steve Harvey, who had indeed proven to be a consistent mentor and supportive presence throughout Christopher's adolescence and young adulthood. Steve served on the board of Christopher's nonprofit organization and continued to provide both financial support and public platform for the issues that Christopher worked to address. The relationship between them had evolved from the initial meeting on a game show stage to a genuine mentoring relationship characterized by mutual respect and shared commitment to supporting vulnerable children. The story of what happened when Steve Harvey broke down after a young boy explained why he joined Family Feud alone ultimately transcended its origin as an unprecedented game show moment to become a narrative about resilience, the true meaning of family, and the remarkable capacity of communities to support children facing circumstances that no child should navigate alone. It demonstrated that television could occasionally capture authentic human experiences that demanded response rather than passive viewing, and that public platforms carried responsibility to facilitate support rather than merely broadcasting difficulties for entertainment consumption. For the millions of people who watched Christopher's original appearance or learned about his story through subsequent coverage, his testimony provided both heartbreak and inspiration. It broke hearts by revealing the reality that thousands of children across the country were serving as caregivers for dying family members or were facing the loss of the only stable adults in their lives, often with inadequate support or recognition. It inspired by demonstrating that when such situations became visible, communities could mobilize remarkable resources and compassion to support vulnerable young people. Christopher's strength and the response it generated illustrated the best possibilities of collective human care. If this story has moved you and caused you to reflect on the children in your own community who might be facing circumstances far beyond what their age should require, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with others who might be motivated to support kinship care families or children serving as caregivers. Consider whether you might be able to offer time, resources, or advocacy to ensure that children like Christopher receive the recognition and support they deserve. Christopher's courage in honoring his grandmother's final wish and the community response that his story generated remind us that family is defined by love and commitment rather than by conventional structures, that children facing extraordinary circumstances deserve extraordinary support, and that we all share responsibility for ensuring that vulnerable young people do not navigate their challenges alone when we have the capacity to surround them with care.